Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Britt Johnson, and welcome to Points of View. It's here where politics isn't a taboo, but a conversation starter. And I gotta say, the conversation has been perhaps louder than it's ever been before, right here on Vanderbilt's campus. We have Occupy Vanderbilt that has just pitched their tents in front of Kirkland Hall. Congressman and Harvard fellow Archer Davis spoke to students about political ethics, and just this week, Vanderbilt Programming Board hosted their capstone event called Impact, where leaders like John Huntsman, Bill Richardson, Vicente Fox, Lamar Alexander, and retired U.S. General Wesley Clark sat down and discussed the future of the U.S. as a world hegemon. Points of View was able to get an exclusive interview with all of these important players that definitely impact both domestic and international policy. But I have to say, perhaps the most moving interviews was when we actually connected with a senior from Vanderbilt University. She was carrying a book, and the title of her book was Words of Wisdom. And in this book, she actually created it when she was in 8th grade, and in the books was some letters of advice that she received when writing to governors, presidents of different countries of the U.S., even Barney. And here's her story.
Hi, I'm Kyle Blaine with VTV News, and I'm here with senior Michelle Olin. She's a political science student here at Vanderbilt. We're about ready to interview former President of Mexico, Vicente Fox, and Michelle actually has a very interesting story she'd like to share. So please tell me about your interaction with Mr. Fox.
Absolutely. I've always been a big fan. I've studied Latin American politics for a while. And in 8th grade, I became class president, so I came up with the idea to do this project called the Words of Wisdom Project, which I actually published right here. And so I wrote him a letter asking for his words of wisdom or his advice. And I got a letter back from his secretary, and it was amazing. It was written in Spanish, and I had it translated into English, and it also included some of his words. And really, he talked about the importance of education for children and how they're the key for the future.
Now, what motivated you to reach out to then President Fox?
I just think he was really in the news at that period of time. There were a lot of negotiations going on with the current president, and I was also fascinated with political history and, being that he is a prominent political figure both in Mexico and the United States, it was important to reach out to him.
Now, what do you want to say to President Fox today when you get to see him?
I'm very excited to meet him today. I've been doing spending a lot of my time studying, actually, Mexico and politics, so it'll be really interesting to see what he has to say.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for VTV News. I'm Kyle Blaine.
We'll be branching off that very idea of words of wisdom, but instead of getting advice from the famous people who are public policy makers, we want to really apply it to our own students here at Vanderbilt. Because here at Points of View, we truly believe that some of the best advice you can get isn't from a politician, but from our very own student leaders right here on campus. Tonight we'll be joined by Aladdin El-Medisi, president of the Middle Eastern Student Association, and he's hosting an event titled Mesa Night, which is a celebration of Middle Eastern culture. Not only will he discuss his event, but provide us with a few words of wisdom on how the U.S. can be a more comprehensive and understanding, vibrant region of the world. But before we launch into his discussion and our big talk of the day, we'll have to provide you with, of course, a news rundown. First, we'll be hitting the domestic arena for some GOP updates. Then we'll be talking about the Trayvon Martin case, and then we'll talk about the American-Afghanistan relations and move on to Vanderbilt's own Impact Symposium. So, in the area of elections, you can see right here on our chart that Mitt Romney has 563 delegates. Rick Santorum ranks at 263, and Newt Gingrich is still in the double digits with only about 135. Ron Paul, though, is coming in at 50. And just from these numbers, you can see that none of the candidates are quite there yet. They need 1,144 to make that marker that's needed to win, which means that any and all endorsements are important. So we have some really exciting news here. According to BBC News, former Governor Mitt Romney has secured a key endorsement for his bid with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. In a recent statement, Bush said, "I am endorsing Mitt Romney for our party's nomination. We face huge challenges and we need a leader who understands the economy, recognizes more government regulations, and knows that that's not the answer, and who believes in entrepreneurial capitalism and works to ensure that all Americans have an opportunity to succeed." Now, his senior advisor, Eric, told CNN this Wednesday that Rick Santorum and Mr. Gingrich should just step aside. And a news story is actually unfolding in Florida. So we talked about politics and public policy, but there's something that's really happening in Florida that's particularly important. And it's actually putting the Shoot First law under scrutiny. The case involves the shooting of Trayvon Martin, who was returning from a shop with chocolate and tea in hand. The timeline actually begins with George Zimmerman, who, after a rash of crime in the community, volunteered to serve as a watchman for his own community. So while he was sitting in his car, he grew weary when he saw a young black man in a hooded sweatshirt that appeared while he was walking. Now, when he was eyeing the black man, he contacted 911 and described this child as a real suspicious guy who looks like he's up to no good, and this is a quote, and he even said he thinks that this character is on drugs. Now, according to the 911 response team, Mr. Zimmerman said he was going to follow the person. And as a response, the dispatcher said, quote, "Okay, we don't need you to do that." But according to BBC News, seconds later, a shot was fired and the dispatcher heard everything. Trayvon Martin, who was 17, was struck in the chest and died. Now, the Stanford police chief did not charge Mr. Zimmerman because he states that no evidence contradicted his account. However, on the perspective of Martin's family, the Stanford police are merely protecting Mr. Zimmerman because he wanted to be a police officer. Now, this has received a lot of views from a lot of people around the world and here in the U.S., and with more than 480,000 people, including filmmaker and director Spike Lee, actress Maya Farrow, and musician Wyclef Jean, have signed a global online petition asking for Zimmerman to be prosecuted. The U.S. Department of Justice has, because of those acts, announced an investigation, but many are likening the Martin case to Emmett Till. A recent post by LoveLifeDesign.com says that the case prompts a series of questions, and we have a picture here. It says that why are we still seeking justice when this is happening, and can we even call it justice? They also say, does America even care for specific groups of people, and is there even equal justice for all people? Justice is under the lens of criticism by both the domestic and international community. And we've all heard about the U.S. soldiers' killing spree in Afghanistan. Sergeant Bales has targeted mostly women and children. But just yesterday, the Pentagon has announced that the soldier was charged with 17 counts of murder. Opponents of this ruling argue that he was not in the right mind. After being interviewed, Sergeant Bales stated that he had some memories of before the incident and memories after the incident, but in between, very little. That's his quote. But he's questioning if he really should be charged. But on the other side, you actually have the Taliban, who have called off peace talks in the wake of the deadly rampage. Now, Afghanistan isn't the only nation in which U.S. foreign relations is tense. Yet another area is Latin America, and specifically Mexico. On day 3 of the Vanderbilt Programming Board's Impact Symposium, former President Vicente Fox, along with former Governor Bill Richardson, discussed this very topic. And Points of View was very fortunate enough to land an exclusive interview with both politicians, both of those politicians, and we want you to take a listen right here.
I think that building walls is a total mistake. It's a historical mistake. Building walls is a product of fear. When there is fear, you build walls. But walls don't work. Of course, I'm not for open borders. That's not the solution. We must administrate the issue, and we must do it with the proper regulations and the proper order. And this is what is already as a bill presented to U.S. Congress by Senator McCain, by Senator Kennedy, and unfortunately is there dormant in Congress. everywhere in this nation. And it's distributed, it's sold, the money is collected, the money is laundered here in this nation and brought back to Mexico to bribe police officials or public servants. So we have a problem that we share together. Drug consumption in the state is done under a criminal act, because in Mexico it's not forbidden. You don't have a penalty for using drugs. But I think it's better even that drug consumption is depenalized in this nation. Like pretty soon it's going to happen in California, like pretty soon it will happen all over the United States. Once you do that, then that amount of money is not for criminals and for cartels and for homicides and for violence and for blood, like is happening in Mexico. But it will be for government to prevent, to educate, to inform. I read from the founding fathers of this nation that governments should not have the right to get in my mind and tell me what my behavior should be.
President Fox touched on the topic of undocumented Mexican Americans or Mexican migrants in America, but it's a widely reported topic. But what most people don't know is that thousands of U.S. citizens are actually living illegally south of the border. According to BBC News, unlike the U.S. government, Mexicans are more understanding, and as a result, many of these U.S. citizens have been overstaying their welcome and have reported back to their families in the U.S. One woman actually commented that, quote, "After my experiences here, I have come to support more illegal immigration. And at the end of the day, I would imagine most illegals have good intentions for working to support their families and wanting a new life." She also continues by saying, "I don't think that we should make it so hard for people to get that. Isn't that what America is all about? And isn't that what America is meant for anyway? Isn't it freedom?" It's comments like these that perhaps impact the perception of the U.S. and Mexican relations and project the idea that unity is of key importance. Today we've talked about the Pan-American relations, Afghanistan, and even Florida, but I feel like one common theme that links all of these topics is the aim and the mission and the yearning for unity. The call for unity is rather resounding, and in our interview today, we are going to put these ideals under the looking glass. I know we jumped around a lot of topics, and it's truly this section where we're going to be discussing the unity of our own country. And it's exceptionally important that we discuss this because it's important for us to know where the U.S. is going and where it's going to be later on in the future. We have to see really what is the respect that U.S. Americans have towards Middle Easterners and also Middle Eastern Americans. Our guest is President of the Middle Eastern Association, Aladdin El-Samadisi, and here we have our interview. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are here with Aladdin El-Samadisi, who is a junior and also president of the Middle Eastern Student Association. This is really my favorite part of our program, where we get a chance to sit down with students and listen to their words of wisdom, their advice, their thoughts, and their perspectives. One thing that we would like to remind our viewers is the fact that whenever you're talking about minorities in the U.S. or a particular region in the U.S. or even around the world, a lot of times people tend to group these people together, and we really want to make sure that our viewers understand that when we're talking, conversing, whatever the topic is here, we want to make sure that this is Aladdin talking as an individual and not representing all people. So for our first question for this afternoon, I know before we were actually taping, one thing that we were looking at was a map according to the U.S. And it was rather funny because this map wasn't something that you see in a history textbook, but it was kind of the assumptions that most Americans, you would say, have of the world. Some of the nations weren't even labeled, others were according to the products that we import, and particularly I feel like for the Middle East it was rather daunting to see that the labels that U.S. citizens have for the Middle East. So could you give me a reaction of what you thought of kind of that picture that I know that a lot of viewers have seen this image before? What are the misconceptions of the Middle East, and what's your perspective on that?
Well, thank you, Britt. Well, the Middle East has multiple aspects to it. A lot of people, judging by the map, believe that it is just straight desert, which about 80 to 90% is desert. That's not, there's nothing wrong with that. So then, because there's so much land that is not being used, as known as the desert, people have to change the way they live, and it's not as as nice as we have it here in America. Over there, it's extremely hot. There's a lot of people that they can't get education. So I think the big stereotypical thing with the map and with the Middle East is that people look down on the Middle East as if the Middle Eastern region is just stupid people, which is a very interesting concept because there's a lot of things that came out of the Middle East that a lot of people don't know. Physics, math, things like that. A lot of the main issues came from the Middle East. So, Britt, if you have anything more specific, I got you.
And so I know that you said you're having an event this afternoon, and it really seems like that's kind of your purpose, is to stop these misconceptions and make sure that truth is known. So tell me a little bit about the event that you're having this evening.
So we're having MISA Night, which MISA stands for Middle Eastern Student Association. This is our biggest event of the year, and actually the biggest one for the past couple of years. So we're really excited. So it's all free, but basically what it has, which we did something new this year. We brought in a speaker, Abdurrahim Fukara, who is the chief bureau of Al Jazeera English, and Al Jazeera is one of the largest uncensored news stations in the Middle East. So he's done a lot of he's interviewed Clinton, Rumsfeld. He's been on the Daily Show. He's a very unique kind of guy. So we brought him to be able to express and be able to really talk about the Middle East and about the revolution. That's what's the hot topic now, is the revolution. So the whole point of the event is to get people culturally aware of what's going on in the Middle East. CNN is one thing, but Al Jazeera is completely something else. So.
All right, so I kind of wanted to go off of that when you're saying it's something else. So we're a nonpartisan show. One thing that we always hear people say is that you should have MSNBC running, Fox News, CNN running in your house. But a lot of times you don't see Al Jazeera running on TV on someone's home, or international news at least. Why do you think that not that many Americans have programs like that running on the TVs, and what's kind of your role in trying to convince people that it's important?
I'm always a big supporter of people, reading issues on both sides. And by doing that, you can form your own opinion. And a lot of people, especially, with 9/11 coming about, a lot of people had this one stereotypic mindset about Muslims, about Middle Easterners, about people with long beards. And until people actually did research, it caused a lot of problems. A lot of youth growing up with the mindset of the 9/11 mishap. So Al Jazeera, which is what I really like, it's the only thing that actually my parents watch when I go back home. That's the only thing that's on, and that's clear cut. If they don't like the president, if they don't like anyone, they'll talk about it. And so the good thing about Al Jazeera, CNN and Fox News, they do use Al Jazeera, but to an extent. They use it when Al Jazeera is talking about something that they're not really taking a side. They're just talking, especially when the whole Egyptian revolution came about. It was basically CNN just taking Al Jazeera and just posting it. And so, which is interesting enough, but I think if people can understand or watch Al Jazeera by itself, they could get a better feel of what's going on, not only in the Middle East, but what do people outside of the Middle East think of America? That's something a lot of people don't think about. And I'll be honest, I went to Egypt over winter break, and I've heard both sides. I've heard people that love America, and then I hear people that just hate America. So it's an interesting dichotomy out there.
Great, and just kind of moving with the comments that you made. One thing I know that in 2003, I guess when their website was launched, there was actually a hacker attack. And so what happened was, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, what happened was that the link was posted to the website for Al Jazeera, and a hacker attacked it, and then U.S. citizens couldn't get onto the website, and instead there was a big picture of a U.S. flag. And I thought it was rather interesting because America, we're a nation of immigrants. We are known as the melting pot. But somehow someone decided to crash the website and then put a U.S. flag as if there is a distinction between the U.S. And Middle Eastern people. And then also we also have Middle Eastern Americans. So what is your response, your reaction to that? And what can we do to make sure that people know there isn't a distinction and we are a multifaceted country?
Yeah, America is the melting pot. A lot of people all over the world want to come to America because America, in my belief, is the best place to live in the world. People may disagree. I think it's the best, and I've traveled quite a bit. On the news, on the topic of the Al Jazeera hacking thing, I mean, I think people wanted to make a point because this was during the whole George Bush era, and I'll be honest, a lot of people in the Middle East do not like George Bush. And so the interesting thing about it was, that was towards the end of George Bush's second term. You've already had the war in Iraq starting and Afghanistan. So it was a way of showing that, in my belief, was just something that people wanted to send out the message, wanted to make that distinction. I don't think it's a good idea to make a distinction in terms of here in America where we are. See, I'm a Muslim, I'm also a Middle Eastern, Egyptian, and I'm also an American. Like I consider myself an American citizen, or I am an American citizen. And especially like in high school when I did JRTC, I was the only one in Alabama who was commander of my school, but I was also the only Muslim and Middle Eastern student. And this was an interesting concept because it's like, wait a minute. Don't all Middle Easterns hate America? Don't all Middle Easterns do this, or do all Muslims do that? And I believe the one way that we can get out of it for everyone is when you see the source of the problem, attack it in a sense to where if you see someone talking about being ignorant about a certain Middle Eastern culture or an aspect of Islam or something like that, as American citizens and as just generally good citizens, you should go and correct them. And what I do, I try to show not by talking but by action. So I think it's that's the only way. If people all take a stance and the ignorance has to go away. I mean, I think we've moved to a certain era in our lifetime, especially college students now. There's no excuse. Whatever you say, hopefully you've done your research, because there's a lot of things that people do say they don't do research, and it's just not a good way to start off after college and stuff.
And you talked about Bush and some of the critique on that, but I also wanted to revisit the topic of President Obama, because there was a lot of criticism for him when he was running for office. And one thing I remember when I was in high school when he was running for office, and people were claiming that he was a Muslim, or was, whatever the term is. And I'll never forget when he got on TV and he said, "I am not Muslim." But I was hoping after he said that sentence, he would have said, "But there's nothing wrong with that." And I feel like a lot of times people will try to relate Islam with extremism, and there's a very clear difference between that. So if you saw that clip, I wanted to know, did you see that when you were in high school? What was your reaction to that, and how does that impact people that are Muslim here in the States?
I want to say I saw it, but I know I was in high school. It was a long time ago. So you didn't
watch the news in high school?
I did. I voted, and I think it was. But to touch on that, I didn't watch it when it actually happened, but I did see it later on because it was something very interesting about Muslims and things like that. I think that it was a political move on his part. I think running as an African American, but also running as a Muslim African American, I think would have made it extreme. I don't think President Obama would be elected because I still think a lot of Americans do not understand what Islam is. They don't understand, and that's when I come back to the whole ignorance part. And in which, as you said, Britt, it would have been a very good move in the eyes of Muslims, but I think a bad move on his part if he did continue that, in my opinion, mainly because, as I've seen, his goal was to get elected. Now, when he's in office, he should make an effort to talk about it's not a bad thing to be Muslim because he's already in office. But if he's running for office, then I think he just had to do what he had to do to get elected. And yeah, it sucks. A lot of Muslims actually believe that he is Muslim because Islam is more of a paternal kind of lineage, and his father is Muslim. So it's an interesting concept.
Wanted to return to the evening that you're having tonight, the program that you're having. You're making a big difference here on campus, but what do you think that we need to do as, I guess, a collective society? So not just Vanderbilt or Tennessee, but really the U.S. Where do we need to be? It seems like you're pinpointing some of the ignorance that people have in the U.S., but do you feel like there's one single misconception or problem that we have in the U.S.? And what would you like to see government do to ensure that that's solved and we no longer have that terrible map that we saw in the weekend?
I believe there's two problems, I think. Okay. The first problem I'll say is communication. I think there's a huge communication barrier between cultural students, we can talk about Vanderbilt and then out in the world, between people that look like minorities and people that are not. And I see it here at Vandy. It's a big issue. And what the U.S. and what everyone needs to do is, not to be shy. We're not living now, and an interesting thing, we're not living in a uni society. We're living in a global society, in a sense to where you need to have cultural understanding to make it in life. Because not everyone is going to be like you, and not everyone is going to think like you. And if you're not able to pass those differences and you do your job and then you understand each other, I promise you it'll work out good. And I think the second thing is intentions. I think a lot of people have malicious intentions, and I think a lot of people have this apathetic to where they don't have intentions to do anything. And what we need is people to have good intentions. If people have good intentions to get to know somebody, all the cultural students here at Vandy, we got here somehow. So, and we're all on the same playing field. And for me, I've been fairly active on campus trying to create that communication, create that bridge that's needed to succeed. I mean, Vanderbilt gives you an experience educationally and academically, but it also gives you an experience if you take advantage of it to get to know other cultures and get to know other religions and get to know people different from yourself. So then later in life, you'll be able to interact with people and not be shy, or just not have the ignorance, and you'll be more knowledgeable.
Do you think that the U.S. will ever make it where we will be able to have a president that is Muslim or atheist or whatever? Can we get to that day?
Well, Islam is actually the fastest growing religion in the world. I believe, and I'll give it, and within the next 10 to 20 years, you will have someone of a different faith, I believe, because religion is changing fast. So I think it's possible. I think people need not to think about religion, but should think about the person, and in terms of voting. I mean, of course, think about religion, but in terms of voting and things like that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening on our conversation. Here are our points of view. Our mission is to ensure that politics is not a taboo, but a conversation starter. We really hope that you listen to our conversation. We hope that it brings about conversations in your dorm room, at lunch with your family, because it's important that the U.S. doesn't just have that image of that map that we saw before, but really has a clear understanding of everything here in the U.S. and around the world. Thanks so much, Vandy. So we just finished our interview with Aladdin, and we're so grateful that he has actually invited us to go see Masonite. It's always great to interview, but it's even better to get the food. So here's a clip of what we saw, learned, and ate at Mesa. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here at Mesa Night. We finally made it. Things haven't officially started yet, but everyone is getting food. We've got some great food options, a lot of talking right now going on about the Middle East, understandings of the Middle East, and what we can do, or at least Vanderbilt University can do to ensure that everyone understands and has respect for different cultures.
There's obviously a lot of things that both the United States could learn from the Arab world and that the Arab world could learn from the United States, and I will get into that in a little while. And I think that what's going on in North Africa and the Middle East is in many ways the epitome of the kind of continuation and constant links that exist between the United States and the Arab world, the United States and the broader Muslim world, which unfortunately we don't very often hear a lot about. The beautiful flowers of America, those of you who are from America or those who have come to study here from other parts of the world, you have to remember that there are, you have counterparts, other beautiful flowers in the Arab world, in North Africa and the Middle East. And part of the reason why you are seeing what you're seeing in North Africa and the Middle East is that many of those young people have come to feel that they've reached a dead end. High unemployment, no prospects for jobs, no prospects for better lives. All the things that many young people here in the United States deservedly take for granted, because there is a recognition that the best investment that a nation can make in its future is the investment that it makes in its youth, in its young people.